If you're not already over there, you can be turning over to 1 Samuel chapter 14. We have one chapter to cover tonight. The last few weeks we've been looking at two different chapters. I'm not going to guarantee we'll make it through the end, because usually we don't. But we fast forward through the end of it anyway, try to get them all in. Question number 1 on our handout. Again, just kind of one of the thoughts that goes along with tonight's lesson. Hopefully get everybody thinking and awake. Wednesday night sometimes it's hard to get going. But the question is, why does the bravery of one individual often set the stage for others to do something that's seemingly difficult? Ever think about that?
Pretend to be cattle or sheep. We follow the leader.
Okay, most of us are probably followers, not leaders. Would you agree with that? Shake your head, yes. Yeah. Most people's characteristic is not to take the lead, so that'd be a good reason. Any other reasons?
Sometimes you get, strength in numbers. So when one does it and it follows on, you get the strength out of it.
Okay, so you don't have to do it alone. What has to take place in order for somebody to achieve something difficult? What would you say is the first thing that would have to happen for a person to achieve something they believe to be difficult?
Persistence. The guy in the lead usually, the guy charging the way takes a lot of bullets. He helps to overcome a lot of the obstacles and figure out how to do stuff.
Okay.
It's harder. Once I see you do it, I figure out what you did, and it's easier for me to do it.
Okay. It's a good answer.
I think the first thing is you got to believe you can do it. If you don't have the belief you can do it, you probably not fail.
Yeah, I'd agree with that statement, because if you don't believe you can do it, are you going to start to? I mean, nobody starts something saying, well, I don't think I'm going to do it, but I'm going to go ahead and try anyway. There's, even in the back of their mind, they're thinking, well, there's some chance. Maybe it may only be 1%, but there's a chance, that I can accomplish this. Because if you didn't believe you were going to make it, I mean, you wouldn't even try it. So it's kind of interesting. I bring that up because, you read about, last week we ended in chapter 13. If you recall back then, Saul had disobeyed Samuel's orders. He was supposed to wait for Samuel to come, and Samuel was going to offer a burnt offering and sacrifices. Saul took it upon himself to do that, and because of that, remember that God told Samuel that the kingdom was not going to stay in the hands of Saul. In fact, he pointed out he was already looking for another king, a man after God's own heart who would take Saul's place. He said, if you'd listened to God and you'd obeyed, then the kingdom would have been yours and your descendants forever. That's important because Israel is getting ready to fight the Philistines. And so that's kind of the context here. And basically, they're at a point where nobody believes that they can defeat the Philistines. Well, I say nobody. We're going to read about one guy tonight who believed that they could defeat them. But after he kind of took that step, you kind of see the entire nation jump on board and follow after him. But until you believe you can accomplish something, it's going to be very difficult for somebody to set out to do that. So be thinking about that as we go through tonight. We're going to skip over question number 2 here. I'm going to save it for a little later on. I put 2 think about it questions in this one, but we'll save it for a little bit later on here and see how far we get. So in chapter 14, we read about Saul, just kind of outline what happened in chapter 13. Saul goes back to Gibeah. And that's where Saul lives. That's where he's from. He goes back, he sits under a tree. And why do you think he did that? Why do you think he went ahead and went out there and went face to face with the Philistines? Well, how many people did he have? Do you remember? Yeah, 600 men. And how many people did the Philistines have? Yeah. Innumerable foot soldiers, 30,000 chariots, and 6,000 horsemen. So basically, I think Saul's at the point here. Remember, he's got the news, you're not going to be king forever. That's going to be taken away from you. And so I think Saul has just kind of given up. He's kind of retreated back here, and he's just sitting there at home. And he says, we're just going to wait till they come and wipe us out. That's about the only choice we've got at this particular point. It is interesting as you read about Saul, there was a certain priest that was stationed there with him. And question number 3 here, what do you learn about the ancestry of this priest that was there with Saul?
Son of Eli.
Okay, the son of Eli. Why is that important?
That certainly gives him some history to rely on.
Okay, what was supposed to happen to all of Eli's descendants?
They weren't going to have them.
Yeah, remember the prophecy that was brought upon Eli's descendants. The priesthood was going to be taken away from him eventually. His 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they both died. And he said, if any of your descendants do live, they're not going to get to be old men. They're going to die in the flower of their age. And even those who were involved in the priesthood, if you look back at the prophecy there in 1 Samuel chapter 2, they'd have to be people who were begging, for a part in the priesthood. Begging to take a part of it, to just have a piece of bread is how he describes it from service in the priesthood. So it's kind of an interesting picture here because you have a king who's been rejected by God. You have a priest who's been rejected by God. And I don't know if that's the only priest that Saul could summon up or why this particular one. But they're both just kind of sitting here waiting for something to happen. And there's one guy, though, in Saul's army who isn't waiting, and that's Saul's son, Jonathan. As you read about Jonathan here in chapter 14, what you'll find is he was a man who had tremendous faith in God. His proposal, remember Saul's just back here sitting under a tree in his hometown, and Jonathan says to his armor bearer, he said, let's go spy out this garrison that the Philistines had that basically were forming a roadblock from keeping any other of the Israelites from coming and giving Saul any reinforcement. And so Jonathan says, we're going to go up there and we're going to spy this garrison out. We're going to check it out. We're going to gain some valuable information. So question number 4 here, how does he show his faith when he proposes this plan to the armor bearer? What does he tell him?
He said, the Lord will work for us.
Yeah, basically he's saying, nothing can keep God from saving us, right? Doesn't matter how many chariots they have or how many horsemen or how many foot soldiers. If God wants to save us, God is going to save us. And so let's go up here and let's go spy this thing out and get a battle plan and figure out what needs to be done, and then we'll kind of take it from there. So they go and they start spying this Philistine garrison out. Again, it's just a roadblock that's been set up and probably kind of a warning party also, in case reinforcements did start coming. They could run back to the camp and they could report to them, and they could muster more forces and come out and not allow them to meet up with Saul or any of these other men. So here they are, and they're spying out this particular place, and the Bible says it was a very difficult place to spy out. They had to climb some jagged rocks. It was a dangerous mountainside that they were climbing up to try to gain this information. And question number 5 here, what method, here they are and they see this garrison, and Jonathan proposes a method for determining whether God was going to give them the victory or not. Should we go fight these guys or not? That's what he asked his armor bearer. And he says what? What's his proposal?
It's how they respond to him. When he shows himself to them, he says, if they say, stay right there, we'll be right down, this isn't the time. If they say, come on up here, boys, he says, God's given to us.
Yeah. So first of all, think about this. His plan was, we're going to let the enemy see us. This is 2 guys out here, right? Him and his armor bearer. We're going to let them see us. We're going to let them know that we're here. And then, based upon their proposal, we'll know whether to go fight them or whether to run away. Let me ask you this question. Do you think that this was just Jonathan's idea, or do you think he might have got a revelation from God?
Definitely revelation.
Well, today we would have to say it's got to be revelation, right? But I don't know. It doesn't say one way or the other, does it? But this was the plan that he'd work out. Again, he had tremendous faith in God. You know, he didn't care how many foot soldiers there were, how many people there were. He believed that God could save him. And so he was putting all of his faith and all of his trust in God. So what do the Philistines do?
Come on up.
Yeah, so part of question number 5 here is why do you think they were feeling so cocky in relationship to the Hebrews? They said, "You guys come on up here and we'll go ahead and kill you."
The Hebrews had been hiding, and they felt that they had fear.
Yeah, first of all, they thought these guys were afraid. Were they right? Yeah, they were right. Most of them were. Remember when Saul sets out, there's like 3,000 men that he takes with him, and as he's waiting for Samuel over that 7-day period there in chapter 13, it dwindles down to 600 men. You know, every day more and more people are drifting off. They're going to the mountains and hiding in these caves and behind rocks and stuff. And so they were afraid. And from a physical standpoint, rightly so. So basically, you know, I think the response was based upon just whether the Philistines believed that they were going to win this battle or not. And so Jonathan says, if they believe that they can defeat us, then we're going to go fight them. If they tell us to stay put and they're going to come down, then we're not going to mess with them. But it is kind of interesting to notice the strategy that he employed to determine whether they were going to go fight or not. So they climb up, and immediately the Bible says Jonathan and his armor bearer killed 20 men. They basically walked across half an acre and they killed 20 men. And then God performs a miracle. What miracle does God perform? Yeah, an earthquake. And I mean, think about this. You know, generally when I think of an earthquake, I think about a little tremor, don't you? Because that's kind of the earthquakes that we've experienced in our lifetime. What kind of earthquake do you think they experienced? They just feel a little tremor?
I'd say probably 8.0.
I think there probably was some ground opening up, don't you? There were probably some troops that were lost. You know, it had to be something catastrophic where these people are like, we got to get out of here. You know, we can't stay here any longer. And so mass chaos ensues. Basically, the Philistines, they just start grabbing their stuff, and I don't even know if they grabbed their stuff. They just start running off and running away. And so you just see this humongous army, you know, little by little, they're just running off in every direction. And so God performed that miracle to accomplish that. As they're running away, question number 6 here, what groups join in to help defeat the Philistines? There's 2 groups that are mentioned here. Maybe we should talk a little bit about Saul's reaction. Because Saul's in a place, when you look at these places on a map, basically they were on 2 mountainsides. There was kind of this huge valley in between them, and so you could see the forces. And what Saul notices as they're sitting there in Gibeah is this enemy is running away. You know, he knows that he didn't authorize anybody to go out here and fight, and he doesn't know of anything or any reason why they would, and so they take a census and they find out that Jonathan is missing. And so immediately in Saul's mind, Jonathan is the reason that all these Philistines are going to run away here. And so his plan now is, you know, he sees them running away. His plan is to go ahead and attack them. But before he even mounts an army and they go out to attack them, there's 2 different groups of people that we read about here that kind of turn on the Philistines.
Well, Israelites with the Philistines for some reason, and they turned on them, and all the people was hiding in caves and stuff. They came out.
Yeah, so you have these two groups of people. There were some Philistines that were among or some Israelites among the Philistines. And my question is this: what do you think? Were these guys? You think they were bandits or outlaws, or you think they were just opportunists?
I thought maybe they'd been captives or slaves or something. I don't know.
Okay, could be.
On that question, I would guess opportunists. But I had a question on 16. It said, "And behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another." Were they killing each other?
Yeah, it's another one of those mass chaos things, and maybe it's reference to if these Israelites were among them, and they start fighting with themselves. I don't think they're going to stop and say, "Now wait a minute, are all those guys Israelites?" So maybe everybody just starts fighting everybody else, and nobody knows what's going on, and everybody's running for their life. Just a chaotic scene. Craziness is ensuing after this earthquake. So certainly the Israelites would have been a part of it.
That's exactly how he did it with Gideon, too.
Yeah. Yep. So these two groups join in. They help defeat the Philistines. The second part of question number 6 is this. Remember, all these guys at first, they were out here running and hiding. But why are people more likely to come out of hiding when the enemy's already in retreat? Yeah. Well, it's easy when they're scared and running away, right? It's easy to jump on the bandwagon then. It wasn't too easy to jump aboard when they were standing there in all their display of power. But is that typical of human nature, think? Yeah, we're always toughest when people are on the retreat, aren't we? Not when they're standing and the odds are against us. So we read about the troops that run away. There's a couple of interesting things that happen here. Question number 7 talks about or asks about a decision that Saul makes that caused a lot of trouble for his troops. And what I want to point out is basically, when you read this chapter, I think there's 2 decisions that are really troubling to me about Saul. If you look in verse 18, now Saul sees that he takes the roll, he sees that, Jonathan and his armor bearer are gone. And notice what happens. Saul says to Ahijah, this is the priest, the descendant of Eli, "Bring the ark of God here." For at that time the ark of God was with the children of Israel. Now it happened while Saul talked to the priest that the noise which was in the camp of the Philistines continued to increase. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Now it's interesting, you read about Saul calling the priest and the priest bringing the ark, and there's a law that God gave his people. I'm not going to go back and read it, but I'll give you the reference. Deuteronomy chapter 20. If you read the first 4 verses, whenever they went into a battle, this was protocol that God told them to follow. Before you go to war, you call the priest. The priest brings the ark, and basically what happened is, it says the priest talked. He kind of conducted a mini worship service, was what the priest was supposed to do. And so before you went out to fight any of these battles, this is what you were supposed to do. So it is interesting to notice that Saul called the priest. The priest is in the middle of this ceremony, and Saul says, "We got to quit. You got to turn it off, and we got to get out here and chase down the enemy before they get away." Can't you just see in your mind, Saul watching this unfold, and the priest is going on and on and on, and Saul says, "We got to pull the plug. It's over. We're going." So he stops him basically in the middle of the ceremony and ends the ceremony, and then decides, well, we're going to go pursue after the enemy. Couldn't wait for that ceremony to be completed. I think it's kind of, again, an indication of the turn that the character of Saul has taken here. So that was one troubling decision that he made. What's the main decision that we read about that caused trouble in the rest of the chapter?
Not to eat all day, wasn't it?
Yeah. So basically, he instituted a law of fasting, right? Nobody's supposed to eat or drink anything the rest of that day. So, is fasting a good thing in the Bible?
Based on circumstances, yes.
Okay, and what would you say those circumstances? When is a good time to fast and when is not a good time to fast? Let's put it that way.
Right after battle, probably that time.
If you're going to be physically exerting yourself, it is not a good time to fast, is it? And that's what these men were going to do. I mean, they're going to be running, they're going to be chasing the enemy, they're going to be fighting, they're going to be physically exerting themselves. They're going to need energy, you know, if they're going to go ahead and complete this task. Go ahead, Wes, you got a comment?
Well, most of the time fasting is like a reference thing to God, or sometimes mourning. He turned that into about him, taking vengeance on
His enemies, right, yeah.
So I would think God would correlate on that too.
Yeah, and this is something to me that really stands out about Saul. And I think you'll see this more and more as we go through the rest of 1 Samuel here. He tries to appear really religious to people. You know, he tries to put on this outward act of just how devoted and how religious of a person he is. But yet, if you really stop and look at him, he's not, is he? You know, it's kind of like, call the priest. You know, let's have this ceremony. Let's do everything right. But right in the middle of it, we got to shut it down. You know, don't have any more time here. Is fasting a good thing? Yeah. I mean, you know, the Bible indicates that it's a good thing when a person decides to do that for spiritual reasons. The problem was this: Saul might have just been doing it for appearance, because it was not a wise or logical decision from a combat standpoint, right? Generally, when people are getting ready to fight and go to war, you don't take away their food and their water, right? That's just common sense. But yet, that's the decision here that Saul makes. So, very, very unwise and very rash decisions that he's making. So we read about Jonathan. Saul makes that oath, that vow. He said, none of you are to eat anything, you know, until the next day. And so, who was not there? Jonathan, right? So Jonathan has no idea that this command has been given to the troops. You know, when they were out there fighting, nobody stopped to say, hey, Jonathan, now come over here and let's talk about this. You got to understand this is a command that Saul gave us. You know, they were just engaging the enemy. They were out there. Nobody had mentioned anything to him. And so what does he do whenever he comes across some honey? Yeah. He takes it and he eats it, right? And the Bible says it was a time of honey, you know, and evidently there was a lot of it in the woods, in the forest. And what immediately happens whenever he takes some of this honey? I think we're on number 8 here.
It was enlightened.
Yeah, his strength was renewed, right? The only problem is this: one of the soldiers sees him do it. And they say, hey, listen, we're under strict orders here. Your father made us take this vow that nobody was supposed to eat of anything, you know, until the enemy had been pursued, until the next day, until we'd done what we were supposed to do. So it is interesting to notice, did Jonathan have an opinion of his father's oath or vow that he made the soldiers take? What was that? Yeah. Well, he pointed out it was detrimental because it weakened the troops. And you read the rest of the story, it helped them from achieving a greater victory than what they did that day. Now, there was a lot more damage that they could have done to the enemy and crippled them and weakened them a lot more if Saul had let them go ahead and eat. And so I want you to think about this question. Well, maybe we should hold it. We'll hold it until the next couple here. So, he didn't think too highly of his father's vow, did he? So at the end of the day, you know, that finally the day ends, which for the Jew, that was what? The evening, right? That was the beginning of the next day. So the day ends, darkness comes, it's the dawn of a new day, so the men are hungry, and what do? How do they behave themselves?
They eat raw meat.
Yeah, they're basically like a wild animal here, aren't they? You know, they were so hungry. Saul had created in them such a desire to eat something. I mean, that they literally just killed the animals and ripped them open and started eating. That's how hungry they were. So, what was the problem with that?
It's lawful to eat blood.
Yeah, remember the blood is sacred. God had given the blood for what? What's the purpose of blood?
Forgiveness of sin.
Yeah, make atonement, right? That's what blood does. So it was supposed to be considered valuable and, you know, sacred, and they weren't just supposed to eat it like they would food or anything else. And so here they are, they basically just kill the animal and they just start eating, and they haven't been drained of their blood. Saul finds out about that. He sets up a high place or a rock. They take the animals there, properly drain them, kill them, drain their blood, and then they're allowed to go ahead and to return to eating. So after that, Saul's already, now remember, they're kind of at a disadvantage here. All these things are taking all this time up. Saul decides, we got to march our troops tonight and be ready in the morning. You know, we got to go ahead and pursue after the enemy and go ahead and overtake them. And so he decides that's what they need to do. And then the descendant of Eli, what was his name? I don't remember what his name was. Anybody remember it? Anyway, he says, well, wait a minute. Shouldn't we ask God what he wants us to do? Saul said, oh yeah, that's a good idea. You know, yeah, we definitely need to be sure this is the will of God, that we need to go after them and pursue them. And so they inquire of God, and what happens?
Not tonight.
Yeah, God didn't answer, right? So God didn't tell them one way or the other way. And so Saul says, something's wrong here. You know, God should answer us, and if he's not answering us, then that's an indication to me that there's some person in this camp who God is displeased with. You know, until we deal with that person, we're not going to get an answer from God. And so basically, he's got in his mind, you know, there's somebody out here that's causing God not to give them an answer. Well, do you think he ever thought it might be himself? Did that ever cross his mind? Do you think he ever thought it might be the priest that I'm trying to ask God with here? What does he immediately think? Jonathan. And why would he think that? Okay? He ate, but do you think Saul knew? Why would he suspect Jonathan? Where was Jonathan when he made this vow? He wasn't there, was he? He wasn't even present. And so it's interesting to me, it doesn't say that he knows that it's Jonathan. Now, if he does, I've got a lot of questions about it, but I think at this point he doesn't know, but he probably suspects that it could be my son Jonathan because he wasn't here with us. But you read about him, he goes ahead and decides that he needs to make a new oath, right? And what is the new oath that Saul swears this time? Question number 12 here.
Whoever solves this issue is going to be put to death. He even states, even if it's my own son Jonathan.
Yeah. So Saul decides, he says, this is what's going to happen. We're going to figure out who's God's displeased with. We're going to kill him. And we're going to put an end to that. And that applies to everybody, even to my son Jonathan.
I think he might have been a little afraid of Jonathan because he was kind of the one leading it instead of him.
So that's kind of, I wish we had more time to talk about it, but you know, I got to thinking about that when I was going through this. He knows there's going to be another king, right? He knows that God is looking for a man after his own heart. Is Jonathan a great man of faith? Yes. Do you think there's any suspicion in the mind of Saul that this might be the guy who's going to replace him? And if it is, maybe this is a convenient way to get rid of it. Right?
That's his son.
It is. he makes the statement himself, even if it's my son, even if it's Jonathan, we're going to put him to death, right? So, does he have any problem with putting his son to death? No. It is a kind of an interesting thought process. I wish I knew more about what Saul did know and what he didn't know. What was going through his mind, that's kind of difficult to tell. But if he thought it were his son, then maybe in his mind he thinks, well, this is the way I can get rid of it, and not cause a big stir or ruckus. So the question that I have is this. I'm going to go back to question number 2 here. To what extent, if any, do you think penalties should be more lenient for people who break the law unintentionally? Because that's where Jonathan was, right? This wasn't a situation where he knew this law that his father had put into effect, and he just went out there and deliberately defied it. He didn't have a clue, did he? Didn't know that it existed. Didn't know until he'd already eaten. So my question is this: do you think there should have been leniency showed toward him because of that?
Yeah.
Well, common sense would say, yeah.
But when the king made a decree like that, it was, the king held that letter of the law.
Yeah.
Sometimes it did not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the king's word, if you broke the king's law, it didn't really matter to them, or at least to the nations around them, right? It didn't matter who you were going to die for it.
I think if he would have done that at this time, his fear would have came true and people would have had his eye. Because this dude was the hero.
Yeah.
They said, not a hero, buddy.
Yeah. He wants to kill the hero, right? He wants the hero to be put to death. So anyway, it's an interesting question, but obviously, wish we had some more time to talk about what Jesus said in Luke 12, 47 and 48. Remember he talked about the servant who knew his master's will and didn't do accordingly was going to be beaten with how many stripes?
Who knew it? Many.
Many. What about the guy who didn't know it, that went ahead and violated the master's will? Few, right? He wasn't totally guiltless, but less punishment for sure, right? So there is a difference. We do know that. So should Saul have shown a little leniency? Yes, is the answer. Just common sense. So he found out it was Jonathan. They cast lots. Interesting to me that the Lord did show them whose fault it was, right? Or at least in the mind of Saul, whose fault it was. If lot falls on Jonathan, and when he finds out it's Jonathan, he's prepared to kill him. In fact, he makes the statement, either God's going to kill me or we're going to kill Jonathan. That's kind of the ultimatum that he gave him. So again, you look at Saul, and to me, Saul's doing everything that he can to appear very outwardly religious to the people. Can't break an oath, got to keep an oath no matter what. You'll see it over in chapter 15 too, where he spares Agag. He's got some reasoning. Go back to chapter 13. Why'd you offer these burnt offerings and sacrifice? Well, I wasn't right with the Lord, and I knew I didn't want to go out and fight the Philistines if I wasn't right with the Lord, right? Outwardly appears to do all these things for a religious purpose, but it's also kind of clear to me as you read there's some ulterior motives that are taking place. The second part of question 13 is this: when, if at all, is it good to break a promise?
I was just going to say, if it's been made, a promise has been made, and it's negative, and with hatred or whatever in your heart, resentment, vengeance, for example, would be a bad time.
Yeah. So did you want to add anything?
I was going to use the example of the God, whatever comes out of my house first, I'm going to sacrifice to the Lord. That's a promise I'm breaking.
Yeah,
I messed up. I shouldn't have made that promise.
Yeah. So, the Bible teaches us we need to be people of our word. We need to keep our promises. But there's also other laws that God gave us too that we have to consider. So if we make a promise that violates God's law, should we go ahead and keep that promise? because we're supposed to be promise keepers, right? That's kind of the place I think where Saul was at. So he was gonna kill his own son. Who intervened on behalf of Jonathan? Yeah, the people, the troops, and the leaders. And why did they consider it unjust to put Jonathan to death?
He was the hero of the day.
Yeah, they recognized him as the man who brought this great victory to Israel, right? So they said, we're not going to kill the guy who won the battle for us. You know, that wouldn't be proper or right. And you can almost see Saul, you know, again, his demeanor, this is what we're going to do. You know, this is how it's going to be. We're no ifs, ands, or buts.
Two of his vows just got broken.
Yeah, and now he's completely humiliated in front of his own people. You know, so that doesn't bode well. That doesn't sit well with Saul. And you can kind of see that paranoia set in and go throughout the rest of his reign.
Well, one of these reasons, this makes him out to be kind of stupid, you know?
Well, I mean, honestly, he was, wasn't he?
That seemed that way.
Yeah, I mean, he's not thinking rationally. He's not making good decisions. He's not thinking about everybody else. I think the only person he's thinking about in all this is himself. And that's just, I don't think he was that kind of person to start with, but listen, we're not 2-3 years into his reign. So it didn't take him very long to change after he got into that position, did it? All right, any other thoughts or comments or questions?